Hi, everybody. My name is Imran Anwar. I am here and delighted to be among such a smart and brilliant audience in such an exciting industry. I am here representing my own thoughts and views, but also moderating a panel of some very smart people that I've had the pleasure of knowing, some before and some meeting them for the first time today. I am a director of strategy and enterprise architecture at Microsoft in the services organization, but I'm here in my own personal capacity, so any thoughts that I share, any visions, any crazy ideas, I was just looking at the camera for the and any bad jokes I make are my personal responsibility. My thoughts do not represent those of my employer, past or present, or any next door neighbor, girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, or sometimes even myself. Having said that, I trust you have all had a chance to look at the title of this session that we're going to have, which was very exciting to me because it basically touches upon some of the most interesting things in the world to me: gadgets, geeks, and especially goddesses, and discussing and finding out what the killer apps of the future are. And when we're talking about apps, I dare say that it's far more than just about apps these days. It's almost a combination of devices, services, and apps that we will be able to put to use to do great things for our clients. Without further ado, I will actually ask my panel to introduce themselves. Because I took 5 minutes to introduce myself, I will give them each 1 minute. I think that's fair.
Hi. My name is Bob Moran. I run Brunswick Insights in the Americas. Brunswick Group is a management consulting firm, and I head its research function. My background is originally in political polling, and my career has migrated over towards market research. Write and blog quite a bit on market research, and also wrote the last chapter in Leading Edge Market Research. Buy the book, please.
And if you buy it, I get 15%.
Good afternoon. I'm Dawn Cunningham, and I am currently the Global Chief Insights Officer at 3M here in the Twin Cities. And I've been in that position for just about 10 months, so probably most of what I say can't be held against 3M either. Prior to that, I worked at General Mills in their marketing research, CI world, for over 25 years. So I have a lot of CPG experience that and really heavy marketing and marketing research that I'm working on infusing into the organization at 3M with lots of excitement with people wanting to take on being customer, consumer, or market-centric. But with a lot of people not necessarily understanding what that takes from an investment or from a time standpoint. So lots of opportunity there and job security, I think.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brian Cooper. I work for TNS, and I'm responsible for our customer experience practice out of the West. I would say we were talking about what's interesting about us individually, and I'd say for me last year, I decided to have a kid, kept my job, and went to an MBA school all at the same time and finished it. So it was pretty cool.
I'm impressed.
Still married.
I barely. I managed to get an MBA at Columbia University, and I did not have a kid to worry about, at least not one that I would admit to. But so I salute you. The fun thing about this topic was that it really touches upon every element and every aspect of almost every industry on the planet. And there is so much development and so much change going on in everything that I think the key word that I come up with is something you referred to, which is innovation. My question is, should we be looking at these gadgets and apps for the sake of gadgets and apps or market research, or for the sake of driving innovation in the industry itself and in the client industries? Dawn, you want to take that?
Well, I think it's a mixed bag, yes, to all of the above, right? Driving innovation is probably what every company would say that they are responsible for doing. And to the extent that mobile has been pervasive across everything else, marketing research, I see it also being significant in the world of innovation. At 3M, as we're a company that kind of is known for innovation, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, I think, but I've discovered just being there some really great tools and apps that we've developed and kind of been using more internally, but they're excellent applications, great innovation in the space of marketing research and marketing research apps. So when we get onto that topic of visual eye tracking and whatnot, I'll say a little bit more about that.
So Robert and I have met at several conferences, and it's always a fascinating conversation, and always impressed with the work Robert does, especially talking about the future. When we're talking about the future and innovation, is it programmable in the sense, can we use market research to drive innovation, or in your opinion, is innovation something more innate?
Wow, give me the easy ones. Well, I think one of the things I've written about is, we think about ourselves in the market research industry, and we use that term. However, there are all kinds, as this group, as the attendees, many of the attendees here, and other conferences we've been at, in the tech space attest, they don't think of themselves in the market research space or in the collaborative space, innovation space, but yet they are. A great example is a company called Spigot, not too far from your offices, I think. And, I don't think Spigot is here because I don't even think they think of themselves as a market research firm, but they're a innovation platform, which I'm very high on. And there are examples like this that I think you can just keep going with. SWIP, which is a group, a startup that I've done some work with, and they have friends there. They're essentially trying to create a universal ratings platform. Now, they don't think of themselves as a market research firm at all, and yet if they're successful, and they have a lot of venture capital now, if they're successful, they could be almost a ratings platform that we all use for our products and services. So I would just say that my first point is that there are a number of players that are not necessarily reflected here that are actually going to have play a big part, especially in innovation in the future.
Thoughts, Brian?
Yeah, I agree with that in a lot of ways. And if you think about our industry, we hear a lot of people talking about it, and not in terms of market research, but in terms of insight or information, right? And if you think about Peter Drucker's low-cost disruptive innovation, one of his things was there's going to be a low-cost disruptor who's going to come in and change this curve and make it easier for people to get information, and cheaper too. And that's what's happening with a lot of these guys. What we charge $50,000 to $100,000 for a custom survey, someone else they'll sell some sort of syndicated offering for $5,000, which will radically change how we have to give information to our clients.
So, if there's a follow-up to that, which is, what does that say for the future of surveying, et cetera?
The controversial question. I think we all have to worry about it. I think we have to change with the market. So you were saying, what happens to the pace of innovation? Are we going to create innovation? Are we going to follow innovation? I think it's, again, kind of yes to all of the above. We have to lead, and we also have to keep up with it. For example, one of the things that we've done is we use a Shazam type technology to listen for advertisements on television. We're leveraging someone else's innovation to create insights and information to capture ad placement.
Robert.
I was just going to say, my view of this is, in this future, that essentially you have two big winners and one probably fairly large loser. And the two big winners are platforms and consultants, and the people that can actually ladder up the value from the research. And that, mid to small size firms that are really data collection in nature, they get hit and probably wiped out. So,
Dawn?
Just a bit of an aside. When you were first mentioned about various players in the space who are collecting ratings or other kinds of consumer information and don't think of themselves as marketing researchers, what I have experienced in the past, back in like 2009, 2010, when we were really pushing the mobile agenda, we saw that many vendors weren't necessarily there yet, and people who said they were there when you went and talked to them, they were really creative in what their devices or their technology could do, but really quite clueless in what that meant for marketing research and how do we get a handle on your sample and whatnot. That kind of thinking wasn't there. So there's a bit of work that will be done as people who are migrating to this space, not thinking of them as marketing researchers, but before they are really able to be used for good marketing research information. There's a lot of work to be done probably by vendors who buy them or by client partners who are really progressive in that area.
Do you have some suggestions for people in the industry to start thinking about?
Well, one thing is that you might just want to you use them for what they're good at, right? So if they have a technology and they can imagine a way of getting great information, but they don't really know how to get that information from consumers, you really help work with them for that creative insight. It might. One of the things that a speaker earlier today said was that we aren't going to necessarily try to convert an old-fashioned ANU that's online today to mobile, because it is different and it's meant to be different, and you're going to get new and different insights that you haven't gotten before. So it might be that some of those vendor partners don't want to become marketing researchers, but they in some other way have another kind of creative thought process that makes you think about the insights you might garner differently.
Okay. Robert, I was wondering, you and I had a conversation which was about the form factors of some of the mobile technologies. It was pretty easy to think of. You had the traditional laptop, you had the phone, then you got the tablet in the middle. Now you've got all these other variants coming up. At what stage does it get too crazy, and what are things that people in the industry should be on the lookout for?
Well, I mean, this is a little bit of a longer time horizon, but you're talking about phablets and things like this. I just make 2 points. One is we should look at South Korea, because South Korea has one of the highest mobile phone penetration rates, and the number of mobile phones per citizen, it's pretty interesting. But the second point I'd make is, in Silicon Valley, a lot of the discussion is actually about wearable computing. And so we're here at a mobile conference, and we think of mobile right now as a phone, but what happens when it's glasses or wristwatch or what have you? I was at the Silicon Valley's AMA event, and we in your neighborhood quite a bit, and everybody there was sort of taken as sort of standard truth that we would all be transitioning to wearables. And so I think that's something we need to think about.
Brian, you and I talked about wearable. Is it really that new?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I mean, if we look back to the late 90s, early 2000s, Microsoft had the smartwatch, right? The smartwatch concept. And maybe the technology hadn't evolved to the point to where people really found good use out of it. Maybe it is. The interesting thing about the Google Glasses is I think they're still kind of ugly. And if you go on their campus, you see all these people wearing it, and the form factor just isn't there yet. What it does is really cool, but the form factor just isn't there yet. But wearables is going to be something that's just going to be coming on the market more and more and more, and we're going to see more and more pressure. And then for us as researchers, I think that, I'll go back to your point about innovation, requires us to think, how are we going to understand how people are using it? How are we going to get information from those kinds of people that are wearing it? Maybe there's something in the eye tracking element that we could use. Maybe there's something, we've got heart rate monitors, so as they look at an advertisement versus look at a general web page, does their heart rate go up because they've looked at the advertisement? So maybe we can use more of the biometric type things for those kind of devices. And
you mentioned eye tracking, etc., which goes to a topic Dawn and I have spoken about. I was in Manhattan a few days ago on a weekend. There's a street fair. And besides all those, the gyro kebab and all the other, fun vendors there was a T-shirt stall that was selling what we've seen before, T-shirts with LEDs blinking and different things. But now these were almost LEDs, which you could use to program whatever graphics or messages you wanted, walking billboards for real. So tie that to maybe even, I was joking earlier, having a yes and a no button that people could put on their T-shirts. You could literally poke somebody, not how Facebook wanted them to, but literally poke and get market research live at a concert or at an event, etc. Or with eye tracking that you and I were talking about. Dawn, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. One thing I want to to point out from what the last two commenters had made is, again, just like thinking of mobile phones, when we think about wearables, I think it's easier to realize that the insights you might be able to gather from some of those other devices are new and different. I don't know if we want to get bogged down as an industry with trying to do research on research and understand, let's make this ANU just like that ANU, or et cetera. I think we have to embrace it as uncovering new insights. And so the virtual eye tracking that has been mentioned, I started at 3M just not too long ago, and it's one of those examples where it's a company who is has a service, but they don't think of themselves as a marketing research provider, right? Nobody really would ever think of 3M as a marketing research provider, me included. So I'm there to buy research. I'm not really there to sell any kind of tools. But we have a product called VAS, Virtual Eye Track, Virtual Attention Service, and we actually have a booth out here. And it's based on 50 years of neuroscience. So we have a team of vision and neuroscientists at 3M because in the 50s, 3M began researching and created the industry of safety on roads. So everything reflective, stop signs and lines in the road and the gears that the workers wear, license plates, reflectiveness, etc. So we have teams of researchers who have been studying vision forever. They've taken all of that knowledge and created an app. You can download it today. You can go on 3m.com and look for it. It's VAS. And it predicts eye tracking with algorithms. So it knows, it doesn't predict how you felt about Post-it notes and how does that all factor in, or doesn't know what your creative challenge was, but it can predict what your eyes will fixate on. And there are certain attributes that we know that cause your eyes to do that. It takes seconds. Take a picture, download a photo, upload it, tell us what kind of image it is. Is it a shelf set? Is it an end display? Is it a pack? What is it? And hit analyze, and it within seconds gives you a heat map and eye tracking and a couple of other things as well. It also does video. It does 30 images per second. So anyway, my point being that nobody had ever really talked to anybody in the marketing research profession. And so it's something that I've kind of taken on. I kind of say I'm sort of the Vanna without the bling, because I'm not really, it's such a great tool within the world of marketing research. Previously at 3M, we were talking to more designers, and we all know how designers like marketing research on their creative. So it's been, so that's a really great example of a gargantuan company playing and dipping their toe in great technology and having really cool innovation, but they hadn't thought of it as innovation within the marketing research space. But it is, and I'm happy to talk to any of you more about it. I'll meet you at the booth afterward.
So, Robert, that brings up in my mind at least two topics. One is privacy. That's something you and I have talked about before. And the second, which I was also thinking, is if you can almost predict that the human eye is going to look at a certain way at an ad, etc., then every designer out there will start making us follow that same sort of design their graphics in a certain way so that the eye follows this typical path that the program told us. And in 100 years, our eye muscles will be just programmed to only look this way, etc. So at what stage, one is privacy, and at what stage does technology like that almost get into mind control, thought control?
Well, I don't know about mind control, but it's an interesting point, especially right now, given all the things that are in the news, and the fact that in a major country, in Germany, the elections may be decided in part by some of these revelations that are occurring right now, and whether the Greens and some other parties can take advantage of it. But I do think privacy is an important point. On one hand, you have a group of people such that would generally be classed under the umbrella as quantified self. How many people have heard of the quantified self movement? See, okay, I see some hands. And so their whole point is that they want to get massive amounts of data on themselves, on their genetics, on everything else as a way to optimize life. And they're willing, in many cases, to share all of it because they think actually privacy is slowing down innovation. On the other side, you have what's going on in Germany and other countries, sort of the reaction against some of these technologies. And I do think that almost everything that we're saying at this conference, especially passive technologies, is predicated on the notion that privacy will not be a political problem for the industry. And I think it will be a political problem for the industry, a big one. And to your second point, what you're talking about, I've tagged it nanny targeting, right? So there's micro targeting, and then there's going to the N of 1, which is nano targeting, which is in part what the Obama re-election campaign folks did. And there's a counter argument against nano targeting, which is that it ends up sort of pigeonholing people, much like the arguments about search several years ago, in which almost everything they start getting is pigeonholed, and they can't live outside of their psychographic, essentially.
So the question then that brings up is, as these gadgets, the wearable ones, the non-wearable ones, etc., start popping up in our lives, do you see privacy being a blanket that sort of cloaks us like a shield or whatever, or is it that I allow my gadget 1 to have this level of privacy and gadget 2 to be for something else, so my heart rate monitor does not report to anybody, but my running meter?
Well, it's an interesting question. Pew Research and some other institutes have looked at public opinions on this. It's important to point out that privacy as an idea is actually relatively new in human history. People didn't have this idea of privacy much before, the American Revolution, the Age of Enlightenment. This idea of privacy didn't much exist. One of the challenges we have in the legal circle is who owns the data. If you ask people in a focus group who owns the data, they'll give you a lot of different answers. Who owns the data legally is another question. And in the U.S., it's who compiles it. But in other countries, the standard is the person upon which it's compiled, which is a very different matter.
I think it's a hugely philosophical debate, and I think it'll be interesting to find out what happens with Snowden when everything finally settles on that. I go back to the eye tracking thing and think, B school capitalism, right? I mean, if I was the first one to develop something like that, if more and more people kept bringing it on or using it, I'd keep increasing the price, and increasing the price. So while
somebody will invent a tracker for the other eye then.
So while the debate is being figured out, I still think it creates opportunities for us to challenge that, to lead in innovation and think about the things that we can be doing to get better insights and information from people who are using those devices.
And see, I guess that's one of the key questions I've always asked, is that data is important, obviously, and data turns into information, but is there enough work being done in driving this data, the market research that it's creating, into genuine decision-enabling, action-oriented insight? Is there enough being done on that? This will probably be the last major question we'll have time for. So
yeah, I think that's an interesting question around giving, just general tidbits versus giving practical advice, right? And I think we're getting pressured as a supplier more and more to say, you should do this because it's going to improve your brand awareness by X%, and give a very specific recommendation. And the more that we can be doing that, the better off we're going to be helping our clients. We're going to be providing insight and information as opposed to research.
Wonderful. Dawn?
I guess one area that hasn't really been touched on at all today is what about any of the issues we've talked about today, privacy, innovation, apps, devices, in the world of B2B. So everybody says, so it's just kind of a question I'm challenging all of us with. I don't have an answer, but it's like if you haven't gone mobile, you're too late. That's the thinking when you're talking to consumers. But when you're talking to people about work in their place of business, I don't know what the answer is to that. So, no, I don't think we're collecting enough information at this point in many cases. And it's something that I really want to try to figure out over the next few months, which is, are there certain industries or professions where we know that decision-making, i.e. where they're taking surveys, is still in an office on a desktop? or are they using laptops or devices? What is that adoption rate when you're not a consumer? And it's something that I'm interested in learning about and doing some work in. If anybody is interested in partnering in that arena, I'd love to talk to you.
So, Robert, to wrap this really interesting discussion, because there's so many topics we could go on for a while. I could go on for a while before you even talk. But seriously, is that with all the things that you just heard, there was one thing we haven't talked about, which was Rateacracy. That's something you speak about. Does that help drive data into information, into insight?
Yeah. So I've written a lot on this topic called Rateacracy, and I'm actually speaking on it in Chicago this weekend. Rateacracy, so you've all, how many have rated a restaurant on Yelp? Okay. And how many have done a 360 review on another human? Okay. All right. And how many have read a review of a movie online, Rotten Tomatoes? Right. Okay. So you're all at the beginnings of what I call Rateacracy, except that I mentioned this a little bit earlier with companies like SWIP. There are companies that are trying to become universal ratings platforms. And if they're able to pull this off, I think, we'll be knocking at their door and trying to figure out how we can use this information. But, it's not easy to pull it off. So.
And which is why we have these brilliant conferences with such great attendees. And I wish we had more time, but this really is an example of some of the huge opportunities plus the challenges that we face. In some cases, we don't even exactly know which part of this big spectrum of opportunities and challenges to target. But that's also what makes this a great time to be alive. If we can imagine a solution to a problem, if we can focus in on it, either the technology exists or the technology companies, whether they're Google, Microsoft, Apple, or whoever, they're out there hungry for ideas, they're out there trying to solve problems. I think this is such a great time to be alive, and I am so blessed and so thankful and so honored to have been a part of this conference with this great panel. Give them a great hand, please. Do we have any questions in the audience? I'll throw that to Brian, I think, if you want to take that.
Sure, yeah. I mean, interesting. We go back to the Silicon Valley and where the VC's dumping money into right now. There's a company called Cloudera, which I think has about 160 million worth of VC funds right now. The second most successful IPO in 2012 was a company called Splunk. And what these guys are doing is they're taking data, so this is more on the quant side, taking different data sources and trying to find those insights. They can look at it from a meta level. They may look for some sort of synergy around a particular variable, like time. Time is consistent across different databases, and then try to find those insights. And when you think about just data integration and big data in general, what they're trying to do is let tools find that stuff for them too. Because a lot of times we just, I think maybe you or someone else said it earlier, where we only have so much time as a human to be able to accomplish something. So we have to rely on tools to do that too.
I say something really quick as an answer. So you hear everybody wants, especially people with something to sell, want to use the term big data, and I, for one, am tired of hearing people use the term big data when they're just saying when actually all they have is a big data set. And there's a very different. It's hysterical. But there has been a lot of work, and a lot of training on Hadoop. Right? And so I think that's one place to look. But then as far as communicating it, wrapping it all up, I would talk about infographics and design. At my last shop, we hired a couple designers basically to full-time put those presentations together into infographics just so people can understand it.
Thank you. That's for Dawn.
I couldn't quite hear you. I'm sorry.
if you can summarize the question also for the others.
So how are we gleaning data from all different parts of the enterprise, going back decades together? My first response would be not well, and that it's a significant challenge. We're just looking to do a knowledge management or insight management pilot with a small set of already pre-existing information and data that is coded when it gets entered into the database, not just a marketing research database, so that you can query it with questions, and it pulls out components of studies, results, as well as video and picture. You code the video and the pictures when you put them in. So that's a pilot. We're just beginning in one small of our 47 divisions, a large division of our 47. And but there's so much historical knowledge and information that I can say, at least in 3M's case, is sitting there waiting to be mined. So not much of an answer, but I'd love to have more conversation with you about it.
Anyone else?
I think Anne had a question. Just kidding.
Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.